Then, there's another type of guilt that weighs heavily and that I often see in patients, and it's the guilt for having endured certain things. It's no longer the guilt for what I have done, but for what I have allowed to be done to me, okay? This guilt weighs a lot. When we are connected to a person who harms us, a friend, a family member, a friendship, a partner, especially a partner, I, as a couples therapist, see this the most. This person mistreats us, and we try our best to prove to them that we are valid enough to be treated well, and we spend years accepting humiliations, abuses, lack of respect, feeling sorry for the other person, feeling guilty. We feel a lot of things that keep us in that relationship, but when we finally get out of it and the sadness, guilt, sense of responsibility, fear, and these blocking emotions no longer accompany us, a phrase that I hear a lot from my patients emerges, which is, how could I let them do that to me? And it's horrifying, and it weighs a lot. It weighs a lot because everything you allow, understand, what is done to you affects your self-esteem and self-concept, and it eats you up from the inside. Because when someone hurts another person, we react with, how could you allow them to do this to you? How can you? In fact, society often punishes the victim and says, well, you allowed it, you didn't set boundaries, you let it happen. In fact, I heard a victim of gender violence tell me that a friend told her that the first time her partner hit her, it was her partner's fault for being abusive, but the second time it was her fault for being stupid. And you think, wow, how can this person not carry the guilt of having tolerated it? But the truth is, we are all susceptible to being mistreated or not treated with respect. In other words, no one is born with armor that protects them from everything. It's true that some personalities may have a tendency to tolerate more submissive individuals, and so on, but I always say that if you haven't been mistreated, it's because the person who had to bypass all your security layers to get inside you and infect you from within, you haven't met them. You haven't experienced that because you haven't met the right person who has deactivated all your alarms so that none of them would go off, and once they were inside you, boom! It's like saying, well, how could you allow yourself to catch that cold, that flu? Well, my immune system is not the same as yours, but your immune system is not immune to everything, it's immune to certain things. It's the same. When you haven't been mistreated, it's because you haven't encountered the right person. I should say, the wrong person. Actually, the wrong person. So, I believe it's essential to understand that the person who is most secure, in the sense that the person who has the least chance of being mistreated, is the one who has already experienced it, has learned from it, and will detect it more easily. But it's not right to blame someone by saying, how could you have allowed, when, in reality, there are so many people in the world, and thinking that none of them can hurt you is very naive. Well, a bit contrary to what has been heavily promoted until today, the idea that you can handle anything, thanks to what happened to you, you're who you are, you're going to learn a lot from what happened to you. Yes, I've learned, but I was happier before when I had no idea. So, I find it disrespectful to sell people the notion that, because they've experienced a tremendous tragedy, they will now be a better version of themselves. Perhaps not. Maybe they spend their whole lives trying to rebuild themselves as best they can. So, we need to approach this with great sensitivity. Especially in mental health, where we see many patients with very delicate situations. We, as psychologists who treat and connect with these patients, don't have the authority to come up with these stories, right? So, I believe it's important that whenever someone tells us that something has happened to them, something tough, something painful, we respect the person's process, understand that they are going through a difficult time, and not force them to you're going to learn, you're going to mature, you're going to be a better person after this. But it is true that, beyond realism, life is what it is. Terrible things happen to all of us, some more terrible than others, but in the end, I always say that when we come into the world, we are a blank canvas, right? The people in our environment and the events that happen to us gradually paint that canvas. And when we finish our life, we can look at it with perspective and see how our painting has turned out. Depending on the strokes of this painting, we are one way or another. We have strokes that hurt, strokes that make us cry, strokes that provoke a lot of anger, strokes that make us happy. Each of us has our own painting, right? With those painful strokes, what can we do? Spend our whole lives contemplating them? When we look at our painting, at the overall picture, we can spend our lives looking at those ugly strokes, those strokes that hurt us, but getting stuck there won't be useful. In the end, the painting is a complete picture, with the good, the bad, and the in-between, right? So, do we have to erase them? No. Do we have to highlight them in fluorescent yellow so that they are the center of our lives? and every time we have a conversation, we talk about that bad thing that happened to us and we go in circles, again and again, without having any other topic of conversation? Will that help us feel better? No. What I suggest we do with the painful strokes is to surround them, identify them, acknowledge that they are there, and say, yes, I went through this, I went through it terribly, sometimes it still hurts, and to this day, I am this way, I react this way, and I have this way of connecting, this way of responding because I have experienced this. But apart from this, I have a huge painting, and I'm going to pay attention to the entire canvas.